History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of Oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to this 579th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be hanging out in New York again. We're going to be checking out the 1890 House Museum.
Excellent.
And this was a house where the Wickwire family lived. And every time I hear the name Wickwire, I think of the movie G.I. Jane.
Yes.
Because one of the guys in there was Wickwire. And I was like, wow, what a crazy name. It was actually this family's last name. And what's even more interesting, talk about synchronicity. The first part of that name, Wick, comes from where they originated from over in Europe. The Wire, I'm not sure when that came into the family name, but this family, that's what's going to make their money, is wire.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, I don't know if those two things somehow went together back in the day, and so they just put Wick and Wire together, or if somehow fate had it that they would have a name that goes with what is going to make them very wealthy.
And so many times names do change as families immigrate into the United States in their country of origination.
We want to invite you guys who are listeners, if you haven't joined us in our spectacular crew over at Facebook, please do so. We have such a great time over there. We have a great family. Lots of things that are very interesting are shared in that group. So we'd love to have you join us.
We definitely love our spooky little family.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
We are fans of horror movies, and one of the most iconic movies of that genre is Psycho. The exterior of the Psycho house is still located on the back lot of Universal Studios in California. However, in the early 2000s, some of the soundstage movie set was dismantled. Who would have imagined that the city of Rib Lake, Wisconsin, with a population of 1,000 people, would somehow have a connection to this horror flick? Rib Lake, Wisconsin was home to the Dahlman Newell Funeral Home until its sale in 2012 to another owner. After the partial dismantling of the Psycho movie set, the owner of the Rib Lake establishment saw that the ornate front door used for close-up shots of the Bates Motel entryway was for sale. The funeral home owner was an avid fan of the iconic movie and jumped at the chance to purchase the infamous door. And what better location for installing the piece of cinema history than as the front door of his business? The Psycho door remained guarding the entryway for years until after the sale of the funeral home in 2012. The new owners desired a more energy-efficient style of door and replaced it. The door was later listed on Craigslist in 2015. It was there that Dan Estep, a La Crosse resident, stumbled upon it, later posting in an online forum that, quote, "Searching for old doors on Craigslist can be crazy." The post read, "I spend a fair amount of time searching Craigslist for old antiques and old house parts. Sometimes for toilets, but, B-U-T-T, that's another story. About a month ago, I was looking around on Craigslist in the antique section. While there, I saw a very large walnut Victorian door for sale. The ad title read, 'Own a piece of movie history.' As I read their ad further, it said, quote, 'The original door from the Alfred Hitchcock movie, this was the door used on the front of the Bates Motel.' Dan scooped it up and headed to a Los Angeles auction house where the door fetched a nice sum of $22,500 in September of 2015. However, the door wasn't actually the front door of the Bates Motel. It was actually the front door of the Bates home. A movie prop door ending up as the entrance to a funeral home and then later on Craigslist certainly is odd. But even odder is the fact that those new owners of the funeral home just carelessly got rid of it.
Yeah, they just throw it up on Craigslist. If anything, you look at this guy and he's like, I'm going to go get a bunch of money for it.
Heck yeah.
All bleeding stops, eventually.
And now this month in history.
In the month of March, on the 14th in 1833, Lucy Hobbs, the first woman to graduate from dental school, was born. Lucy was the 7th out of 10 children born to Benjamin and Lucy Beeman Hobbs. With so many siblings, the young Lucy took a job as a seamstress to help contribute to the family at the age of 12. She later attended Franklin Academy in New York and graduated in 1849. Lucy was a teacher for about 10 years in Michigan, and during her tenure, she began her study of medicine. In 1859, she moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and applied to the Eclectic College of Medicine. Her admission was denied due to being female. Lucy began studying privately under Professor Jonathan Taft, who was the dean of the Ohio College of Dental Surgery. Through this method of study, she managed to apprentice herself to a practicing graduate of the school. She practiced dentistry in Cincinnati until the spring of 1861. She went on to practice in Bellevue and McGregor, Iowa as well. By July of 1865, Lucy was awarded a membership in the Iowa State Dental Society and later was sent as a delegate to the American Dental Association convention in Chicago. By November 1865, after much determination and persistence pursuing her career of choice, Lucy Hobbs was granted admittance to the senior class of the Ohio College of Dental Surgery, later graduating in February of 1866.
Do you like having screens on your windows?
I mean, we do like it because it keeps the bugs out, but we have removed a lot of the screens on our windows because it gives us a better view.
Better view of the birds in our garden.
Yes.
How about the ability to sift flour or to strain things? You have the Wickwire family to thank for that. The Wickwire family had a big impact on Cortland, New York, and the world. Their wire weaving factory would employ hundreds of people and make the family very wealthy. Chester Wickwire would build his grand mansion in Cortland that runs as a museum today. It would seem that his spirit remains in the house, as do the spirits of other family members. Join us for the history and hauntings of the 1890 House Museum.
Cortland was first settled in 1791 and was named for Pierre Van Cortlandt, who was the first lieutenant governor of New York. In 1853, Cortland officially became a village and then was incorporated as a city in 1900. Cortland is surrounded by 7 valleys, which led to it being nicknamed the Crown City. There was a family that led to industry blossoming in Cortland, and that was the Wickwire family. The Wickwire Brothers Company was started by Chester and Theodore Wickwire. Chester was born in 1843 and Theodore was born in 1851, both in McGraw, New York. The Wickwire family moved to Cortland when Chester was 19. Chester and his father Raymond opened a grocery store on Main Street. Raymond passed away, and so Chester's brother Chauncey stepped in to help, but he also died. Apparently helping out at the grocery store is not a good idea.
Goodness, bad for your health.
By that time, Theodore was old enough to help Chester, and so the two brothers ran the grocery store, and then they changed it into a retail hardware store that they opened in 1866. They would shut this down in 1876 to follow another avenue, which was weaving wire.
The brothers had received a carpet loom as payment for a debt, and Chester experimented with changing out some parts so that the loom would weave wire.
I could totally see you doing something like this. Like somebody would give you a loom and you'd be like, I don't really want to make carpet or clothes. What could I do with this?
I love to MacGyver things.
Yes.
We have no idea what made him even consider using a loom to weave wire. The experimentation worked, and soon the brothers were using the machine to make fencing, particularly for chickens, screen cloths for windows, dish covers, netting, coal sieves, and they became the largest manufacturer of flour sieves. The business expanded with more machines and was incredibly successful because there were very few factories doing this kind of production. The Wickwires patented everything as well. As a matter of fact, the brothers were the ones who supplied most of the machines to the factories in the United States. The brothers bought a 6-acre lot on South Main Street in 1881, and they built several buildings on that lot. The brothers finally incorporated in 1892, and a new wire mill was built in 1893. They employed immigrants from Germany, Italy, Russia, and Ireland. Working conditions were poor at first, but the brothers continued to innovate new safety protocols and implements, and the factories became safer places to work.
I did manage to find this story that was in the Cortland Democrat on April 25th, 1890, and it's headlined Fatal Accident at Wickwire Factory. At about 1 o'clock last Saturday afternoon, an accident happened at Wickwire's wire mill on South Main Street that resulted fatally to one of the persons injured. Mr. Frank Hotchkiss, who has been in the employ of the Wickwire brothers for nearly 20 years past in various positions, and whose duty it was to gather up the rolls of wire cloth in the weaving rooms and take the same to the basement on the main elevator, had loaded the elevator with a heavy load and started the same from the second floor. James Conway and Fred Siemens were with him, the latter stepping on the elevator after it started. The crossbar of the elevator broke almost immediately after the start, and the whole fell to the bottom a distance of about 20 feet. It's your worst nightmare. It's an elevator crashing.
Ugh.
Seaman was cut and bruised some, but not seriously. Conway had a severe cut in the back of the head, but is not seriously hurt, and will be out in a few days. Hotchkiss received some very severe cuts and bruises about the head and shoulders, and was so badly injured that he died from the effects at 3 o'clock on Sunday. So I was like, he had some severe cuts and bruises and then he dies? That sounds like worse than that. He must have hit his head.
Yeah.
Dr. Hughes had charge of the case, and everything was done for him that medical skill could devise. He resided on Groton Avenue and was a faithful employee and good citizen. The funeral services were held from the Congregational Church, of which he was a member, at 2 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday. A large delegation of Grover Post and the entire force of the employees of Wickwire Brothers wire mills, acting as an escort to the funeral procession from the family residence to the church, the latter being filled to its utmost. Mr. Hotchkiss leaves a widow and 3 children to mourn his loss. It is supposed that the elevator started to run away and that the brake, being suddenly applied, caused a sudden strain on the crossbar and snapped the same in two. It would seem hardly possible to break the strong and thoroughly braced crossbar with a steady strain, no matter how heavy the weight. Hotchkiss had been repeatedly warned not to load the elevator so heavy, but he seemed to think that the crossbar was strong enough to hold any weight that could be piled on the elevator, and he is said to have paid little heed to these frequent warnings. That's what always happens when you don't do that. And isn't it interesting that there were 3 of them on the elevator and he's the only one who died? Coroner Moore impaneled the following jury on Monday. It has a bunch of names. After viewing the remains and looking over the elevator, an adjournment was had until Wednesday at 2 o'clock. The jury met at the courthouse and heard the testimony of 3 witnesses of the accident as to how it occurred and the subsequent removing of the injured man. Mr. O.W. Lund testified to the condition of the elevator, both before and after the accident. And Mr. T.H. Wickwire gave evidence touching the quality of the elevator purchased by the firm for use in the wire mills. Dr. Hughes described the injuries as examined before death and the result of the postmortem examination. The jury found that Frank Hotchkiss came to his death April 20th, 1890 from injuries received by an accident which occurred on the 19th day of April at about 1 p.m. at the wire mills of Wickwire Brothers in Cortland, New York, caused by said Frank Hotchkiss overloading an elevator and suddenly jumping upon the same, causing the crossbeam to give away and precipitating the elevator and its load to the bottom of the shaft. We, the jurors, further say that we find no cause for censuring the proprietors of the wire mills. Signed by jury and coroner. So I just thought that was a really interesting story connected to the factory.
Definitely. Workers made around $1,100 a month in today's money. There were a little over 200 employees, and the Wickwire factory was the largest employer of women in town.
A little fun fact. Products from the Wickwires were used in building the Panama Canal and the Manhattan Project. The family didn't know much about the latter since the building of the first atomic bomb was a top-secret project.
How do you come across these factoids there, Mort?
I knows things. Actually, you should know by now that I'm highly intelligent.
If you do say so yourself. Of course, I am still trying to figure out how they knew that their stuff was used in a top-secret project, because wouldn't that information still be top secret?
The Wickwire brothers would expand into flour mills, and they built many other buildings that were known as the Grand Central Block. Chester would build the 1890 House Museum as well.
Yeah, if it was the 1980 House Museum, it wouldn't be very impressive. It'd basically be, one of the houses that you or I grew up in. The 1890 House Museum is sometimes called the Cortland Castle because it kind of resembles a castle, and it symbolized the grandeur of the Victorian and Gilded Ages. This was constructed from limestone in the chateauesque, I love saying that, chateauesque, architectural style and designed by Samuel B. Reed. The mansion is a mirror image of circus manager James Bailey's house in Harlem, New York. And indeed, Kelly, when I looked at the pictures, they are the same house.
Very cool.
And they're definitely mirror images because everything's on the opposite side. So if they were facing each other, they would be, those mirror images or whatever. And I thought to myself, why would you go to that trouble of, I don't know how easy it was to just flip the blueprints like that. Maybe it was just a really easy thing. But I'm like, why wouldn't you just build it exactly the same instead of as a mirror image?
I'm sure it's not that tough to flip the...
And I was also wondering if Mr. Wickwire was like, I love James Bailey's house, but I don't want to totally copy him, so flip it a little bit to change it up. The mansion has 30 rooms. The interior of the mansion features parquet flooring, oak and cherry wood that has been hand-carved, and decorative stenciling. The real wow factor of the house, though, are its windows. J.B. Tiffany and Company designed the stenciling and much of the decor, but the stained glass windows are definitely not Tiffany produced. You thought I was going to say these were
I
Tiffany
totally
windows,
did.
Mm-hmm. The Belcher Glass Company made these, and they are truly unique. Henry Belcher headed the company, and he was a stained glass artist that had patented a unique process he dubbed mosaic. And they do indeed look like a bunch of mosaic tiles, only they are glass. Rather than using the traditional grout, he used a mold within which he assembled small pieces of glass and then sandwiched it between two pieces of asbestos. Don't know if you want to get too close to that. I wonder what he ended up with later in life. Before pouring liquid lead into the mold. I'm sure he died of something horribly toxic, but these windows are incredibly complex and like nothing we have ever seen. I'll be sure to put a few of these up on Instagram. They are gorgeous. To me, it's like Tiffany who?
Yeah, no kidding.
That's how amazing they are. Guests were greeted at the east entrance door with these magnificent windows on the doors to prepare them for just how gorgeous the interior would be. You don't see much about Belcher or his windows because they fell out of favor because when you make something this gorgeous and this complex, it's impossible to repair.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So a lot of people were like, I love them, but if they get broken, there's no way we can fix it.
The first floor of the house featured 2 parlors, the dining room, breakfast room, library, and living room. One of the parlors was dubbed the Gold Parlor and features French Revival styling with silk wall coverings.
It's probably the coolest room in this house to this day.
Nice. The family bedrooms were on the 2nd floor and the servants' quarters were on the 3rd floor. There was also a recreation room on the 3rd floor, on the front part of the house with a billiards table and dance floor. A small playroom was just off this room. There's also a cupola at the top of the mansion that gave a great view of the Wickwire factory. One of the first things to greet visitors is the Inglenook, which is a fireplace that has an archway in front of it with bench seats. It looks very cozy.
This is where I would spend all of my time.
I'm sure you would, especially being in New York.
Yeah, with the winter time, I'd want to be right next to that fire.
Says the girl that used to sit on the heat grates when she was a child.
Yeah, we had electric heaters in that house that I was just talking about that we had built in 1979. And there were like these registers that were just at the bottom of the wall.
Right.
And yeah, I would park my butt right over those things in the winter. I am not a cold weather person at all. Never have been.
Some of the woodwork features carvings that are supposed to look like wire mesh.
I'll get some of those pictures up there too. I thought that was kind of cool that they added that little extra touch.
Definitely. The dining room furnishings were all hand-carved, and the original set is still in the house. Chester would fill the house with his family. He married Ardell Rouse on October 2nd, 1866, and they had 3 sons, Raymond, Charles, and Frederick. Raymond would die when he was 6 years old from scarlet fever. This happened in 1878, so the family wasn't in the mansion yet.
The most well-known servant at the 1890 mansion was Margaret Stack, who was an Irish immigrant that cooked for the family. She came over in 1902 to join her aunt in Cortland, and it is believed that her aunt had arranged for her employment at the Wickwire mansion. Margaret would have had Thursday afternoons off and every other Sunday off. That's how I guess it was for all servants all over the place in America at that time. During those times, she socialized with the large Irish population in Cortland, attending dances and actually performing as part of a 4-person Irish reel doing traditional Irish step dancing. River dance!
I love river dance.
I know, that would have been great.
I got to see it once.
I did too. She wrote a recipe book as well. During a social event, she met John Lane and they became engaged. In 1910, Margaret was given the summer off with pay, and she went back to Ireland and explored the British Isles with John. The couple married in her hometown of Athea. They returned to Cortland in the autumn and continued to work for the Wickwires for another year, him at the factory and her at the house. And I heard they didn't live together because he couldn't live at the house in the servants' quarters or something. Then they returned to Ireland and ran a grocery store. Now, that's one of the narratives that I've seen. There are rumors that Margaret left for a reason, that something bad had happened, possibly attempted rape or an actual rape, but there is no evidence for anything. This was something that has come out of paranormal investigations, and there are claims that her spirit haunts the house, and we're going to discuss that later. But honestly, I found nothing about that being the case. It just seems to me like she and John got enough money together and they decided they wanted to go back home to Ireland and run a grocery store. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Ardell was active in social causes around Cortland. She would host teas at the mansion once a week for the women in town who worked on charitable causes. Ardell herself served on the finance and entertainment committees for the Cortland Library Association, and she was a member of the social committee and women's auxiliary of the YMCA. She championed the building of a new hospital that eventually became the Guthrie Cortland Medical Center, and the family donated $95,000 toward the hospital's construction and expansion. Chester gave back to Cortland in many ways and supported his workers as much as he could. Charles and Frederick joined their father in the wire weaving business when they became adults.
And it seems to me that Chester and his brother Theodore were really good bosses for their employees, because the employees bought Chester and Ardell a really expensive and fancy teapot that is still at the museum to this day.
Oh, wow. Well, that's nice to hear that they were such great employers.
Yeah, so they must have pooled their extra money together to do that for them. Charles, their son, had been a gifted child playing multiple instruments, and he was fluent in French. He earned a degree at Yale University, and he married his childhood sweetheart, Mabel Fitzgerald, who was literally the girl next door.
Aw.
So he did marry the girl next door. The couple would build their red brick mansion that is today the Lynn Parks 68 SUNY Cortland Alumni House, right next to the family mansion. The State University of New York at Cortland, or SUNY Cortland, was founded in 1868 as the Cortland Normal School, became a four-year college in 1941, and was renamed State University of New York College at Cortland in 1961 because they wanted a really long name. Its current name came in 2023. The campus covers 191 acres today. The original school almost completely burned to the ground in 1919. Old Main was finished in 1923 and the campus reopened. The 4 years it took to rebuild, classes were held in various buildings in town. The house was built in 1912 and covers 15,000 square feet and has beautiful gardens. It is rented as a wedding venue and for other events as well. Jean Miller Biddle was the granddaughter of Charles, and she inherited the house. She sold it to Charles A. Gibson in 1992. He lived in it as a private residence for 12 years, and then he sold it in 2004 to the SUNY Cortland Alumni Association.
Charles became the vice president of the Wickwire Brothers factory. When his father died in 1910, he became the president, and the factory would have its peak production under his management from the 1920s to 1940s. Frederick Wickwire followed in his brother's footsteps, with learning to play the banjo and excelling at school. He too graduated from Yale University. Frederick loved animals, and he had a menagerie of pets that include a Pyonis parrot he named Jack, who had free reign in the house.
Yeah, he didn't have a cage. He could just go wherever he wanted. I don't know if that's a good idea with a parrot.
A lot of parrot people do that.
I just would think they'd start chewing on everything.
They do.
So much for the furniture. I don't know how they kept the furniture nice in this house, but...
Pionises, though, they're not a large bird. They're like a mid-sized parrot. So
okay.
He joined the factory as general superintendent. He married Marion Goodrich in 1912, and they had 4 children. Ardell Wickwire passed away in 1915, and the mansion was left vacant until 1923, when Frederick moved into it with his family.
Frederick set about renovating the family home, and the way it appears today is much how he remodeled it. He remodeled a new breakfast room in the Art Deco style that was so popular in the 1920s. Lincrusta wallpaper was added to the second and third floors. I was like, I need to know, what is this Lincrusta wallpaper?
It sounds like it's old and crusty and peeling.
Now, that term doesn't do it justice by calling it wallpaper. This is more of a molded wall covering and has these gorgeous textures and patterns.
Oh.
And when I went to look it up, Lincrusta came up with its website. So it's an actual company that still is making this, and it's very popular today still.
Interesting.
But it's like when you go and you feel like a wall and it has the texture on it.
Sure.
With patterning. I mean, that's what this is. So to me, it's not wallpaper. It's a wall covering. And then I was looking at it, at how you put it up and do all this stuff with it. And I'm like, that's a lot of work. I would rather just paint. Marion and Frederick also added the fernery, which has a glorious stained glass ceiling. Marion had an affinity for cherubs, so they make their way into much of the decor. Frederick only lived in the house for 6 years as he died in 1929 from an undisclosed long-term illness. The only thing that I really heard about him is that he died at the dining room table.
Oh, my.
Marion remarried to local judge C. Leonard O'Connor 2 years after Frederick passed. Marion and Leonard modernized parts of the house through the years, and the judge passed in 1971. Marion remained in the house until she passed in 1973 at the age of 85. She would be the last Wickwire to live in the house, so they were in that house for a very long time. The Wickwire factory shut down in 1971. The building suffered a fire shortly after that and another one in 2005, and I don't know anything else about it. I'm assuming that the building is still there. But if you guys have ever been to Cortland, live in Cortland, please let us know. Is the factory still there? Because I could not find anything else out about it. I just heard that it had those 2 fires, so I don't think they've done anything with it.
The house and contents were sold at auction, and the Landmark Society joined Cortland County leaders in preserving the house and reopening it as a museum in 1975. Many of the belongings that had been sold at auction were brought back to the house, and other antiques from the Gilded Age were bought. In 1984, the 1890 House Museum received its official NYS charter to operate as a 501c3 historic house museum. The 1890 House Board maintains the property, and they host historic, architectural, and ghost tours. The house isn't shy about their spirits. The spirits in the 1890 House Museum are believed to belong to the Wickwire family members and their servant, Margaret. The main activity takes place on the 3rd floor in the billiards room, but shadow figures and sounds have been seen and heard everywhere. Frederick didn't appreciate the restoration efforts that have been done, including recently from February to April of 2025, so activity might be amped up after this.
So if you're going to go do a ghost hunt there, wait till May.
Clearly.
I mean, I'm thinking it's not open right now because they're doing restoration efforts, but Margaret Stack is said to be seen as a full-bodied apparition, and she seems to still be carrying on her chores. Her voice has been captured in EVPs, and she likes to move objects around. Investigators claim to have picked up on sounds and felt the residual energy of some kind of attack, which is what led to rumors that Margaret had been attacked. Whoever attacked Margaret is also said to be here, leaving the feeling of a dark energy in the cupola, and crude comments have been caught as EVPs. And again, I don't know if any of that is true about her, so I don't know if they're picking up on something else or what's going on here.
Possible tulpas?
Yeah. Chester loved his mansion and is still seen looking out from the cupola as though still trying to survey his factory. His apparition has been seen sitting at the head of the dining table, and often that chair is found pushed away from the table as though someone had been sitting there and just pushed back to get up. His shadow figure is seen going from room to room.
A docent in the house claimed he felt a cold hand on the back of his neck during a ghost hunt. He also felt as though someone was watching him. Even though Raymond didn't die in the house, there are claims that his spirit is there. He likes to play on the 3rd floor, and a docent once felt a small hand touch him up there. Harry Weston was interviewed by CNY Central around 12 years ago. He was a longtime board member and often ghost hunted in the house. This was a really old guy, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, because usually you don't see somebody in their 70s talking about ghost hunting.
A really old guy. We're not that far away from 70.
At least 20 years, kind of, sort of.
Not quite.
I think we're 20 years younger, so I guess I shouldn't say really old guy,
15,
but he was older.
His favorite thing to use was a pendulum with a crystal on the end. As the reporter filmed, Weston demonstrated how Victoria would make the pendulum go in circles.
And as to who Victoria is, I have no idea. He was just talking about, Victoria, if you're here with us, can you make the pendulum go in circles? And it did. And I was like, I I don't know any Victorias in the Wickwire family. Was this another servant? So I have no idea who that is.
Somebody following him around, maybe.
Maybe.
He also told the reporter that fingerprints had been seen on the wall of a servant's bedroom. And during a ghost hunt, a recorder was left on the billiard table, and when listened to later, there was a distinct sound of pool balls hitting each other. Only problem, there was only one ball on the table.
Lee Benson has been a guide at the house and is the vice president of the board of trustees. He shared with Cortland Curiosities, this is on YouTube, that a couple had told him when they were in the basement they heard a little girl say hi to them. Again, I don't know where this little girl's coming from because that's not Raymond. I wonder if that's Victoria? And again, I don't know who that is. Another group asked for a spirit to indicate that it was there when they were on the third floor and a flashlight rolled across the floor. He also said that he has heard stories of the pool sticks coming off the wall and that nobody leaves the house without feeling something. Ghost hunters visited during season 9. Raylene Wheatley told the crew that she believed that Ardell haunts the house. She has seen shadow figures at the end of hallways. Board member Susan Cummins believes that Chester is definitely in the house. Michelle Grimes was the caretaker of the house at the time. She was in her office one day when she heard a loud knock come from upstairs when no one else was in the house. She went upstairs and found that a binder fell into the middle of the floor. They've also heard an audible voice yell, "Get out of here," in the basement. Balls have been heard knocking about in the billiards room when none of the balls are out. Paranormal investigator Scott Clark took pictures in the house and they captured a female figure with their night vision camera. I looked at it and it does kind of look like there's a full-bodied something there. It's night vision, so it's kind of hard, to tell. Jason and Steve heard something shuffling across the floor in the attic. Britt and KJ were in the billiards room and their geophone, which detects vibrations, was going crazy on the pool table. And they also tried to debunk it because there were cars that go by on the street. So they were like, is it causing vibration? So this huge truck comes by the house, which would have caused a lot of vibrations.
Sure.
And the geophone didn't do anything. So they're like, okay, something is making it go crazy that has nothing to do with the road. They also could hear something that made them think someone was trying to grab one of the pool sticks. And then the REM pod started going crazy. Adam and Tango were in the basement and they heard shuffling. And then Adam felt his left calf get really warm and Tango could feel the difference from his other calf. So he's putting his hands back and forth and it was like, whoa. A board member had been in the basement one time and felt like something rubbed on her calf, almost like a cat. So they were wondering if the same thing had happened to Adam there and that's why there was that warm spot. Steve and Jason went down to the basement and set the geophone down on a display case and asked that if Chester or Ardell was with them, that they knock on the glass as hard as they could on the count of 3. And when Jason got to 3, the geophone went off like crazy.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like there was something intelligent there that knocked on that. And again, this is another one of those, how does that happen? You can't see them, they're not physical, but they were able to knock on that glass hard enough to cause a physical geophone to pick up a vibration.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
We need to know more. This group of investigators that calls themselves Alone, A-L-O-N-E, investigated in 2022. And they do this really cool experiment we should try with the spirit box or a portal. They have large flashcards of items and ask what is on the card.
Kelly, I am totally in. These are like when we were in preschool and they would hold up like the letter F and it would have a picture of a fox. That's what these are.
Nice.
So they would just hold it up and be like, can you tell me what's on the card?
Well, I know what I'm going to buy at Walmart next week.
Yes, absolutely do it because, we've been wanting to try to do some of these things too, where we're like, can you tell me what the color of my shirt is or something so that we're seeing that it really is intelligent. It's not some random thing coming through, that it's actually, I could tell you what that is.
Yeah, it seemed to work pretty well for them. It said ball for ball, goat for goat, ring for ring. They asked about playing the banjo and the portal said harp. They also captured pool balls hitting each other when they weren't in the billiards room.
Yeah, so that seems like something that happens a lot, is this sound of the billiard balls hitting each other. So I think that's probably something residual.
Other equipment they had set up on the pool table went off. They asked Frederick if his parrot was with him, and the portal said, he dropped dead.
I don't know what happened to the parrot, but how awful.
REM pods went off repeatedly, and one of the investigators named Rick had his name come over the portal. This house seems to be very active.
Yeah, it was a fairly long video and they had stuff going on constantly. So this is definitely a place if you want to do some ghost hunting to check out because they got some stuff. SUNY Cortland's campus is said to have several haunted areas and a few ghosts. At first I'd heard that Charles' house was haunted as well, that the alumni house, and then I could not find any stories to go with that. So I was like, well, the alumni house is not haunted. Apparently, Charles didn't want to hang around with the rest of the Wickwire family who were next door. But they do have some ghost stories for the rest of the campus. Brockway Hall has the ghost of a former cook that likes to stand at the top of a staircase. I don't know why. Are they surveying people eating? Clark Hall has a weird apparition that appears in room 716 once every year, and this is the ghost of a bleeding football player called the Gridiron Ghost.
How bizarre.
I have no idea what the story is behind that. Sounds like he had a bad game. Cheney Hall features the ghost of Elizabeth, who was apparently pushed down the stairs from the 4th floor in the 1980s. She appears in a misty form in the building with her arms outstretched. And a lot of these stories I picked up from articles that they'd written in like the campus paper or whatever. And I think it was a history group that was going about doing this like, hey, let's investigate these legends and stories that are on the campus about these ghosts. And they could find nothing about any of them. So I don't know how these all got started, but if any of this stuff happened, I mean, a bleeding football player, I guess he could have just gotten hurt on the field. But I don't know why he would just show up once a year in room 716. But like the girl going down the stairs, especially in the 1980s, that would have been in a newspaper.
There would be a story about that. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's a college campus. They make up urban legends and stuff all the time.
And there do always seem to be hauntings on universities and college campuses, so...
Cortland has an interesting history, particularly when it comes to many of the weaved wire items we enjoy today. Of course, the production of such things has changed, but one thing that doesn't change is our appreciation for ingenuity and beauty, especially in the form of architecture. Is the 1890 House Museum haunted?
That is for you to decide. Well, if you've been there, let us know. Sounds like
please.
A very cool place. Another place we should have hit when we were in New York, but we were in New York City, and this is not New York City. So we'd love to have you guys check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you have some feedback for us, you can write us at historygoesbump@gmail.com or leave comments at any of our various social media. Underneath our post about the life and afterlife of Benjamin Franklin over on Instagram, one of our listeners said, I'm actually related to Ben Franklin. His mother's maiden name was Folger, and so was mine. He's my cousin like 10 times removed. We have the genealogy. So I was like,
that's
wow,
cool.
That's very cool to be able to say that you're related to him. And also it explains where I'd said the son's middle name of Folger came from. Because I was wondering, how did he get the middle name Folger?
True.
And then Cindy shared over at Patreon, my husband and I visited Zach Bagans' museum in Las Vegas. One of the first rooms had a chair that belonged to Wyatt Earp. My husband is not a big believer in ghosts, but he is a big fan of Wyatt Earp. As we started to leave the room, he decided to lightly tap the chair as he walked by. He said that as he touched the chair, he got a jolt up his arm that felt like an electric shock. It wasn't just the little jolts you get from static electricity. It was a jolt that traveled up his arm.
Wow.
Which is actually the opposite direction of what I got when I was touched by a ghost. It went the other way from my shoulder down. It really scared him, and he didn't want to tell me since I would not have been happy he touched the chair. Was he not supposed to be touching the chair?
I'm sure.
The rest of the tour, he kept telling me, don't touch anything. I was surprised since he's not much of a believer in haunted things. Later, when I questioned him what his problem was, he finally confessed, and I think he now believes in ghosts. That'll do it. Get you every time.
Absolutely.
Having your own experience. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Be sociable. Drop the chain rattling, neck biting, and shape shifting. And join us on Facebook and Twitter at History Goes Bump. Like the page and follow us.
The Wickwire's patented. I have such a hard time saying it.
Patent is a hard word to say. It's kind of like horror, rule.
Don't call me a horror.
You're a rule whore.
Rural.
There's just words that are hard to say in the English language. That's patent is one of them, I think. And when you're saying patented, it's even harder.
The Wickwire's patented. The Wickwire's patented.
Patent.
The Wickwire's patent everything.
The cuppy.
The cuppy.
The cuppy would
It's
build.
like the couple with the puppy?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. They might have had a dog.
There was a distinct sound of pool ball. There was a distinct sound of pool balls.
You can't say balls?
I mean, I had a pool table in my prior life.
Where do you...
Stop it.